Rolex does not control the watch conversation by making the most watches. It controls something far more dangerous. Desire. A Rolex sits behind glass in a boutique. The price is high, demand is higher, and for some models, money is still not enough. You walk in ready to buy. They tell you to wait. Not because watches do not exist, because access is part of the product. That is the genius. Rolex does not just sell time, it sells proof. Proof that you made it. Proof that you belong to a club millions want to enter. For 2025, analysts estimate Rolex sold around 1.15 million watches, generated more than 11 billion Swiss franc, and captured roughly 1/3 of Swiss watch market value, not by being the loudest, cheapest, or most available, but by controlling 4 things that matter in luxury: belief, access, service, resale, trust. So the real question is not why Rolex is expensive. The question is, how does one company make a watch feel less like a product and more like a passport? The story begins in 1905 in London. Hans Wilsdorf is young, ambitious, and obsessed with an idea serious watchmakers dismiss: the wristwatch. At the time, pocket watches dominate. Wristwatches are seen as fragile, decorative, and unserious. But Wilsdorf sees the future. He believes the wristwatch can become modern, elegant, and reliable if he can prove it. That word matters. Prove. From the beginning, Rolex is not built on hype. It is built on evidence. In 1908, Wilsdorf creates the name Rolex. Short, clean, perfect on a dial. Then comes the breakthrough. In 1910, a Rolex becomes the first wristwatch in the world to receive a Swiss certificate of chronometric precision. In 1914, Kew Observatory in Britain gives a Rolex wristwatch a Class A precision certificate, a distinction previously reserved for marine chronometers. That is the first real Rolex move, turning doubt into proof. The message is simple. This is not jewelry. This is precision on the wrist, and that mindset becomes the foundation of everything Rolex does next. In 1926, Rolex creates the Oyster, described by the company as the first waterproof and dustproof wristwatch. But Wilsdorf understands something most brands still do not understand. A claim is weak. A public test is powerful. So in 1927, swimmer Mercedes Gleitze wears a Rolex Oyster during an English Channel swim. The watch spends more than 10 hours in the water and keeps working. Rolex does not hide the result in a brochure. It blasts it across the front page of the Daily Mail. That is the formula. Technical claim, public proof, prestige story, mass belief. Rolex is not just telling people the watch is strong, it is showing them. The watch does not live in a store. It lives on the wrist of someone doing something difficult, swimming the channel, climbing mountains, diving deep, flying across time zones, racing at dangerous speeds. Rolex attaches itself to achievement until the watch becomes more than an object. It becomes a symbol. This is where Rolex becomes dangerous. It does not just make models, it claims worlds. In 1931, Rolex introduces the perpetual rotor, central to modern automatic watches. In 1945, Rolex launches the Datejust. Then the 1950s arrive, and Rolex builds icons with surgical precision. In 1953, the Explorer launches, tied to the Everest era. That same year, the Submariner arrives as the first diver's watch waterproof to 100 meters. In 1955, the GMT-Master appears for pilots crossing time zones, linked with Pan Am and the Jet Age. Then comes the Day-Date, the Daytona, and the Sea Dweller. Look at the pattern. diving, aviation, exploration, racing, leadership. Rolex does not sell random watches, it colonizes human achievement. Other brands sell luxury. Rolex sells the feeling that you are built for pressure. Once a brand owns that feeling, competitors are not fighting a watch, they are fighting a myth. But myth alone does not build a fortress, infrastructure does. Rolex is privately owned by the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, created in 1945. That structure gives Rolex something public companies rarely have: time. It does not need to chase quarterly earnings. It can protect the brand and think in decades. Rolex describes itself as an integrated and independent Swiss manufacturer. That is control. The company says it has 15,548 employees, 1,470 points of sale, 815 external service centers, 34 internal service centers, and 1,900 qualified after-sales people. Spare parts remain available for 35 years. After that, specific replacement parts can be manufactured as required. That is permanence. When a buyer spends serious money on a Rolex, they are buying the belief that the watch can outlive them. The manufacturing system is tightly controlled across Switzerland. Movements in Bienne, cases and bracelets in Plan-les-Ouates, dials and ceramic bezels in Cherbourg, and final assembly in Geneva. A fifth site is being built in Bulle to support future capacity. This matters because Rolex controls the machine behind the myth. Now comes the part people argue about. Does Rolex make fewer watches on purpose? The honest answer is more precise. Rolex does not publish full production numbers, but analysts estimate that in 2023, Rolex produced about 1.24 million watches and generated 10.1 billion Swiss franc in sales. By 2025, estimates say sales rose above 11 billion Swiss franc, while output or allocations fell to around 1.15 million watches. That is the brutal part. Fewer watches, more money, more power. But this is not simply Rolex makes less forever. Rolex is also building capacity. The real strategy is controlled mismatch. The market wants more than Rolex releases right now. That gap creates heat. And the boutique? The waiting list becomes mythology. At resale, hot models become signals. Daytonas, Submariners, GMT-Masters. Not every Rolex trades above retail. Some models cool. The market is not magic. But the hottest models stay powerful enough to lift the entire crown. Rolex does not need every watch to be impossible. It only needs enough watches to feel impossible. That is how scarcity becomes desire. For years, the secondary market looks like something happening outside Rolex. Gray dealers, collectors, flippers, online platforms. But now Rolex is moving into the second life of its own watches. Its certified pre-owned program allows official retailers to sell second-hand Rolex watches authenticated by Rolex. The watches must be at least 2 years old and come with a new 2-year international guarantee. That changes the game. Rolex is not just influencing the first sale anymore, it is adding official trust to resale. Every watch reports the measurable global secondary watch market reaches $16.73 billion in 2025. Chrono24 says Rolex accounts for 33.7% of total spend on its platform in the first half of 2025. That is not just popularity, that is liquidity. Rolex becomes the watch market's benchmark asset, not risk-free, not guaranteed, but more liquid and trusted than almost anything else in luxury watches. The buyer does not just think, can I wear this? The buyer thinks, can I get out later? And Rolex answers better than almost anyone. So, does Rolex literally control the entire watch market? No. The watch world is bigger than Rolex. Smartwatches, fashion watches, independents, and high horology masons exist outside the crown. But in Swiss luxury watches, Rolex controls gravity. It sets the benchmark, shapes buyer psychology, anchors resale confidence, controls authorized access, and makes ownership feel permanent. That is real power. Rolex does not win because it screams. It wins because it whispers, and the world leans in. It spends a century teaching people one thing. A Rolex is not just how you tell time, it is how the world tells what you have become. That is why the crown is so hard to beat. Other brands can copy the shape, the steel bracelet, and the celebrity campaign, but they cannot easily copy a century of proof, a century of precision, a century of achievement, a century of scarcity, a century of trust. So here's the question that should stay with you. If a company can turn a machine that tells time into a symbol of status, permanence, and human achievement, what business is Rolex really in? Watches or belief? And more importantly, how much of what you want only exists because someone convinced you to believe in it? If you want more deep stories about how real empires are built, subscribe to the channel.